The Department of Agriculture is looking at new options for expanded telework even after the pandemic is over. Remote work could help the government expand the talent pool for the finance workforce. Mallory Barg Bulman is Research Director of Finance Process Excellence at Gartner. Mallory, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. I'm reading report after report after report in the private sector of companies talking about moving the jobs to the people instead of moving the people to the jobs. Is that what we're talking about here? Is that something that the government is or should be looking at?
That's exactly right, Francis, and thank you for having me. The government is going to follow the same patterns that we're seeing elsewhere. You know, HR leaders are estimating that as many as 50% of workers will work remotely following the pandemic. That's up from about 30%. So there really is an opportunity here to think about different talent pools and ways to access different individuals.
If we think about moving the jobs to the people, then how do we go about identifying where the people are, especially in financial management, to determine how we move those jobs and where we move those jobs?
That's a great question. And that's something we undertook at Gartner last year. What we really started to do is look at job postings on USA Jobs where they were looking for finance talent. We distilled the top competencies. Top among them were analytical thinking, accounting, operations, and managing compliance with procedures, laws, rules, and regulations. We then used our data to really find where that talent is. And we found some of the areas won't surprise you. You know, New York City, Washington, D.C., but there are other areas where government is not currently recruiting, but the talent is there. Areas like Dallas, Boston, Los Angeles. These are areas that have that talent, and it's more untapped than in some of the other areas.
We're starting to see, especially Wall Street companies, moving or thinking about moving the physical locations of their headquarters to where the jobs are. Is that something that we could ever expect to see in the federal government, or is this a remote work phenomenon, maybe overstating it, but is this a remote work function entirely, do you think?
I think it can be a both-and solution. You know, as you know, a large percent of the federal government already is outside the Washington, D.C. area. I think there's an opportunity really to think critically about which jobs can be remote, which jobs can be outside of a headquarters function, and really leverage the opportunity of technology, of remote work, to expand the talent pool.
Is it necessary for these remote work jobs to be attached to some federal installation somewhere? For example, an office here in Washington determines that the best hire for the job is in San Antonio. Is it necessary for that person to be attached somehow to some installation in San Antonio, or are we starting to think about these jobs as maybe being entirely remote, and that person comes to Washington very periodically just for face-to-face meetings that are necessary and things like that? Are we to that point of rethinking the way that these jobs look?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Francis. And, you know, as you know, GAO recently came out with its high-risk list, and strategic human capital management was one of those areas that not only has shown up on the list for a number of years, but also has decreased or declined in recent years in terms of the quality. I think there's a real opportunity with new leadership in OPM to really think about strategic human capital management, think about the work we need people to do and what can best set them up for success. And instead of thinking of telework as a barrier to success, I think there's an opportunity here. It's an opportunity to get the talent we need. It's an opportunity to think about how to manage them better for success, and really to set up meaningful outcomes in people's work so that they're able to be successful regardless of where they are.
I use these private sector references probably ad nauseum, Mallory, because there are so many of them that we're seeing now. And another factor that private sector companies are thinking about is if we put these jobs, or if we base these jobs someplace outside of one of the major metropolitan areas, we might not have to pay people as much. In that example that I just used, the pay differential for San Antonio is quite a bit lower for an agency than it is in Washington, D.C., or New York, or Los Angeles, et cetera. Is that a factor, or should it be a factor in the way that an agency thinks about its human capital strategy?
So that's going to be a really challenging policy issue that really needs to fall, I would think, at the OPM level of really thinking about the cost of living, the cost of labor, and what that costs and how they want to strategically think about their work.
In the work that you and your team did in looking at this issue, the research that you've done, what were the benefits that you found in broadening the scope, the possible pool of candidates? Is it just better at those three things that you said are the greatest need in the financial management community, or is there some other benefit that you determined?
So we didn't look at the success of individuals in these roles, but what we did look at is where you can find them. We know that finance talent is really hard to get, and federal agencies are actively recruiting for these skills. I think there's an opportunity for the federal government to be an employer of choice, to really lean into the idea of a flexible workspace, and frankly, to recruit from populations that may not be groups they readily think of. You know, I identified those three areas where the talent is there right now. We also identified 4 additional areas that have emerging talent in these areas: Phoenix, Minneapolis, San Antonio, Miami. These are places where federal agencies can look for talent. They can make sure they're getting the diverse, well-qualified body of talent that they need.
Mallory, thanks very much for joining me. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you very much.